Chats podcast. On this episode, we're going to reflect back on the season just finished, ponder some of the highs and lows, and talk to our guest about what he thinks is, or how he thinks his beloved Georgia Bulldogs did during the year. But first, we are the College Chaps. I'm George, and on this episode, I am joined by the doyen of college football this side of the pond, Ollie. How are you, my friend?
All the better for that rather grandiose introduction, George. To be honest, it's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in 2025 so far. And so, yeah, greatly moved by that introduction.
What did I say last week? I said something nice last week, I think, and I can't
I
remember what it
always say
was.
something nice. It just gets grander and grander. I don't know how you're going to move on from this to something like even more elevated by the time we get to August. We're going to have a lot of shows before August. It's going to be
You're gonna be the
the
grand
hyperbole is going to be off the charts by the time we get to week zero.
you're gonna be the grand wizard of college football by the time we get to August.
Well,
Um,
I'm old. That's one thing for sure.
well, you said that, not me. Our guest returns for a second visit, which makes him a member of the exclusive Repeat Offenders Club. You can hear him on his excellent Saturday in Athens podcast, which, as far as I know, is the only podcast outside of the Paul Feinbaum show to have its very own theme tune. So it's awesome to welcome back Seth Saunders. Howdy, Seth. How are you?
Hey guys, thank y'all so much for having me. Loved hanging out with you guys the first time, and honored to be asked back.
I had to go back and count because I was sure you'd only been on one time before, but then that's because you've been kind enough to have me on your podcast. So I started to lose track, but as Ollie said, that's age catching up with me. I said at the top of the episode that we were going to talk, look, a bit of a retrospective, right, back to
hmm
what the season just gone, and it has been such an awesome season, Seth. And Ollie and I and Alex have talked about this a lot, but what are your kind of initial thoughts on the season that we've just seen, which was a transformative season for college football?
Yeah, I think two main thoughts, boys. The first one was I just could not have loved the college football playoff in an expanded format any more than I did. I absolutely loved it. We have been clamoring for it for years. James, my co-host, and I are both graduates of FCS schools. So the playoff is something that we were in undergrad and experienced. His alma mater actually played my alma mater in the semifinals for a chance to go to the title game when we were in college together. And man, the playoffs just magic when it's that way because there's not much to gripe about, right? You decide it on the field. So I loved that, and I loved a lot of the different variables that came along with that. And the other thing, I don't know that I can remember a season that had this much parity, this much, I think, balance across the different conferences and across the Power Five. It was just excellent. I mean, every weekend it seemed like something was happening where you're going, "Oh my God, I can't believe that happened." And as a viewer and as a fan, I just don't know that you could have asked for much more out of the 2024 season. So if you are somebody that adores college football the way the three of us do, and everyone that listens to this show, man, you just got to be chomping at the bit for it to start back up because what a treat this past year was.
Well, 2025's got a lot to live up to after 2024. Ollie, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, maybe kind of quite specifically, but in general, what do you think was good about the college football season this year? What did they get right this year?
Yeah, I think Seth hit the nail on the head there um, with his description of there being not a season in recent memory where there was such parity. You know, mentioned the Power Five there, but I think across the whole of college football, I think what is something that we've touched upon multiple times, not just the last year, but over the last 6 years that we've been doing this podcast, is at some point in the season you figure out who's good, and you figure out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. I think what was great about this season was the fact that we never really, I think, until the college football national championship game, I don't think we knew, and we don't even know now who was really really good. And I think that was the joy of this season. I think that was the good of this season was the fact we never really truly knew who was good, and it added that level and element of unpredictability to what is already, a sport we celebrate the unpredictability of college football. And I think the good, the great, whatever you want to call it, of 2024 was the greatest season of unpredictability that certainly I can remember as being covering the game and being a fan of the game. I don't remember a season that was as unpredictable as 2024, and I think that's there's a lot that goes into that. And a lot of it involves stuff that people decry the sport for, the transfer portal, NIL, and changing the college football playoff format. A lot of what people think is the ugly side of college football really did help contribute towards what made 2024 so great, I think.
You've used two different words. Seth has used a parity and you've used unpredictability, but what they both kind of really featured was the fact that it was a very hugely competitive season where Ollie's just said that until really the last few weeks of the season, we had no idea who was the best team in college football. Seth, you saw that at a very, local level with the SEC, because, the SEC championship game wasn't decided until I think the week before the game. It was either the second last or the last week of the regular season. We've never really seen an SEC season like that, certainly not in recent years.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, I think, how quickly the transfer portal and the NIL specifications have changed what rosters look like. I thought about it a lot during the Super Bowl on Sunday night because so many players on that Eagles defense, which dominated, the Chiefs dynasty all night on Sunday evening, they were dogs, right? And that was talked about a lot on the broadcast. And you think about all of that talent on a college defense, and then you hearken back to all of Coach Saban's teams at Alabama that were built the same way, where it was just a factory of NFL talent in the two deep. And we're just not, I don't think, going to see that anymore in the age of the transfer portal and NIL, because now it used to be those programs were the ticket to your future. You went there because that's where you developed, and that was the most direct path to get where you wanted to go, which was the league. Well, now, instead of sitting on the two deep at Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State, I can go play at Indiana, or I can go play at Baylor and make a little bit of money. I saw an article today, Texas Tech dropped $10 million in the transfer portal against that new salary cap and added a ton of talent. And they are hell-bent on making a run at a Big 12 title and a playoff berth. And I think that is what can happen. We've talked often on our show, and I was fascinated by this. How about SMU? Okay. SMU is a school that said, hey, we want to join the ACC. And hey, Atlantic Coast Conference, we don't need the TV money for like the first few years because we just want the Power 5 access. We'll take care of everything else. Because look, man, they were NIL before NIL was legal. They knew what they were doing and have plenty of capital to make things happen. And so I just think the turnarounds are so much quicker for different schools. And so, which for me as a fan, I love it because you look at a school like Arizona State this year, where Kenny Dillingham's crew was picked to finish dead last in the Big 12. And they end up, about as close as you can get to being in that Final Four. Played an absolute whale of a game against that Texas team in Atlanta. And so, it's just a different world now. And I think a lot of people, some don't like it, some do. I like what it allows. Do I think there need to be some guardrails put in place? I sure do. But I do like what it's creating for the competitiveness across the full landscape of college football.
Seth, you make a great point though, because I've spent the last couple of days on for a work project doing the top 100 returning players, and at one point, you would have had a team. Let's use Georgia as an example, or Alabama, or one of the front running SEC teams. You'd probably have 10 players from one single program like that within that, but the field spread of teams that make up what will be our final like top 100 returning players is huge, and that's a testament to everything that we've just talked about. That inability to have a 10-man defensive front that all is NFL talent like you've seen in Georgia teams in the past, and some people say that's a bad thing for college football. I don't see how you can even begin to quibble with the product that it's enabled the broader college football landscape to put together this last year.
Just a very quick diversion, because Seth mentioned it at the Super Bowl. We don't talk about the NFL in this episode, but I thought it was just I was so pleased for Nolan Smith, right? When he was at Georgia, I thought he was just such a incredible leader in that Georgia team, because a lot of the focus was on the really big guys like Jalen Carter and some of the others. But I just thought it was so cool that he's obviously been a great player for Philadelphia this year. I thought it was absolutely awesome. And not to forget, there was a few ex-Alabama players on that team also.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
We've kind of been faffing around the edges a little bit, because we don't like to go really negative on this program, but I guess this is I don't know if it's the only transformative year. I think we may have many evolutions of this going forward. What do you guys think didn't work so well this year? Let's not talk about the bad stuff. Let's just say what didn't work and what needs to be looked at and needs to be changed. Seth, how about you starting on that?
Okay, so as much as I love the expanded CFP format, and I talked about it earlier, I loved it. But if I was making a change, I always thought this was a miss, even when they announced how it was going to be. And again, this is my FCS bias showing. I would love to see the first 2 rounds stay on campus. I thought that first round, that Friday night in South Bend, and then those 3 games on Saturday on campuses, it was incredible. I thought it was the coolest part of the entire season, was those 4 games with so much consequence and so much riding on them being on the home campuses of these teams that have worked so hard all year. And then if you're one of those top 4 teams where you've quote unquote earned the spot, you then don't get a game on your own home campus in your own home stadium. And I hated that. I would have loved to have seen those towns. I would have loved to have seen Eugene and Athens and Boise State in the Sun Valley and all the different things. Okay, all the different teams get their shine. So I didn't love that. I hope they will evaluate and look at that. I know there are bowl tie-ins and politics that work into that. The other thing is, look, guys, I think we have to have an honest conversation about whether or not the top 4 conference champions from a seeding perspective should be the top 4 seeds. I think it would be a more even measure competitively if they just took like we do normally. Look, top 4 is top 4. I think in some ways they tried to reinvent the wheel on that because they were trying to appease the different power brokers at play. And I get all that. But again, man, the FCS has done a good job at this for a long, long time. And they could have stolen, I think, a lot from that model. Now, obviously, it's a much bigger product. It's 24 teams. Every round but the title game is on home campuses. I know that's not going to be how it shakes out, but I think they need to look at the format a little bit moving forward just to further enhance what I thought was a really cool product.
It's an interesting point, isn't it, Ollie? Because it feels as though college football is moving more towards an NFL model rather than the tried and tested FCS model, which Seth talks about, and perhaps FBS doesn't want to go down that route, but certainly for me, we missed a trick. I agree with Seth. I'm not convinced that the 4 conference championships, with the benefit of hindsight, need to get the bye, right? I would love to have seen them play on campus, I think, to really kickstart that process. Whereas with the NFL, I think you get a bye into the next round, and New England Patriots have earned their all of their medals on the fact that they've been able to utilize that and take that to their advantage. It feels a little bit like we need to They need to. That's the one thing they need to think about. I would have thought.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's definitely there's always room for improvement with anything. And the NFL, you referenced NFL there, they've never finished kind of tweaking with the playoff format we've seen in recent years with the expanded regular season and expanding the playoff, and there'll always be an element of tweaking. I think there's probably a golden area somewhere in between what we have now, some of the proposals that are out there, and then the FCS model, which I completely agree with Seth, the way the FCS do their playoff makes it such an attractive, exciting, entertaining postseason product. And there's got to be a way of rewarding. I think there's got to be a way of rewarding regular season success as it pertains to the playoff, but also we saw a lot of that whole rest versus rust conversation
Yeah.
for the playoff, where those teams that earned the right to get a first round bye were just plain rusty when it came down to the ball game, and the teams that had played the week before they were dialed in, they were nailed in, there were no such concern, and again there's got to be a solution for that element as well. I think there's got to be a solution for the Army Navy game. And I don't mean a solution as Joel Klatt and many others mean in terms of moving it to the start of the season. I mean leaving that game where it is, leaving it alone, and ensuring that it maintains the standalone spectacle. Because I for one, didn't like the fact there was a bowl game on the same day as the Army Navy game,
Mhm.
and I'm all for there being football from noon Eastern till you know gone midnight, and what is a Hawaii game finishing at 7 a.m. our time. Like I'm all for as much football as possible, but I think the Army Navy game needs to be protected. It needs its place in college football lore, and having a bowl game and a no disrespect to any of the bowl games, because I watch them all, I love them all, I love all the teams that participate in them. But what is essentially a bottom tier bowl game on the same day as the Army Navy game is, and that just doesn't sit comfortably with me. So I think there's a couple of post season problems that have that need solutions. And I think if that's the negative takeaway from 2024, I think that's probably where we're at, right?
These don't feel insurmountable in that respect, right? It does feel like it's tweaks rather than wholesale changes. But
Mhm.
Ollie makes great point, Seth, in that why we all love college football is because of the tradition and the rivalry and the over a century of history that's got us to this place. There's a fine line here in terms of, because it could be a tipping point, right? You could tip the game too far, and I think a
Mhm.
lot of us are already a little nervous that we're moving far too quickly towards the NFL model. But there is a tipping point here. We need to retain the tradition of the game, don't we?
Yes, I love the Army Navy point, because there's probably not a game on the college football schedule that I have an affinity for more than Army Navy. There's just, man, there's so much to it. There's so much tradition. There's so much pride. And I thought in a year like this, it's even more special because Army was excellent. I mean, had a magical year, win their conference championship on their home field. Jeff Monken is excellent. I love their motto, last of the hard. They're just hard not to root for, right? And then Navy also had an outstanding year. Blake Horvath was must-watch TV pretty much every weekend. And so, that game should be its own. It should have its day. And I love the rotation between the traditional cities that they go to, and there is not a single thing about that game that I don't adore. And so I couldn't agree with that more. And I'm with y'all, man. I am not on. I like Joel Klatt, but I do not like the idea of starting the year with Army Navy, because I think it takes away the build and the importance of such a beautiful rivalry. And lest we forget, one of only 3 neutral field games in all of college football. Red River Shootout, world's largest outdoor cocktail party, in Army Navy. And to your point, George, that is the one thing with all the change. I don't want any of those things to be lost. There was a lot of talk with the SEC expansion that Georgia was going to lose certain games each year. It will hurt my heart if they don't play Auburn every year. It will hurt my heart if they stop playing Tennessee every year. I just, you have to preserve those things. I mean, how can you not play the matchup that produced Hobnail Boot and produced My God, a Freshman and produced Dobbsnail Boot and, a countless array of others? And then how can you not play the Deep South's oldest rivalry? I don't want to lose any of it. And so they've got to work to maintain those things, money be damned. And I know that is the top of the chart, but they got to preserve those things, man. That's what makes our sport so singular.
Kind of feels a little bit like it just needs a couple of years for things to settle down, and then everybody will start to relax a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be overly negative, the one thing that I hope we don't see again ever, let alone this coming season, is bottles appearing on the field. I know we've had this before, right? I know this is not necessarily new, but it did feel. I'm all for fan enthusiasm, and I don't really mind the goalposts coming down, although sometimes the regularity of that kind of doesn't make much sense, to be perfectly honest. But certainly, I love to see, Appalachian State, them going absolutely mental and booing and all that, because I think that's what Vanderbilt when they beat Alabama. I mean, that was just such an awesome. So you just keep our enthusiasm, not chucking bottles on the pitch. Very, very quickly, we're going to move to the positive side of things. I want to ask you about your highlights of the season, and that can be personal, professional, whatever you want it to be. But I think we've all experienced something quite special this year. And I think on this podcast, we've been kind of talking from the heart that we realize it's been special. We maybe take 10 or 20 years for us to realize just how great a season it truly was. But what were your highlights of the season? Ollie, how about you?
Wow. I think it's honestly, I think it's difficult to nail down to a single highlight.
Have you got a list of 10? And is that what you're telling me? Like, where will I start, George?
Steph thought he was coming on for 30 minutes of this podcast, and it's actually 3 hours of me just getting overly emotional about college football. But I think whenever you get to witness greatness in action, I think that is something special, and I think that should be celebrated. And I think what we saw out of Ashton Janty this year for Boise State, coming just, I don't want to say out of nowhere, because obviously anyone who watched Boise State the season prior and even before that knew what sort of talent he was. But to have this like almost historic season, which really transformed the long-standing group of five narrative, for Boise State. They played Oregon so hard, and they didn't disgrace themselves in the playoff, and it was we saw that just pursuit of excellence and from Ashton Janty, and I just thought that's always incredible to be around something that is that monumental. I think it just was incredible. I think we said this on the podcast or two. I think the highlight of the season, Notre Dame becoming this likable national entity under Marcus Freeman. We've said it. We feel like we've said it 3 or 4 times on this show since near the end of the season. We've never been the biggest Fighting Irish fans on this podcast, and we had heart over heads like moments for both myself and George, where we were like, we want Notre Dame to win the college football national championship, and we just never thought we'd hear ourselves say such a thing. So I guess you could call that a highlight of the season.
Well, I was hoping that one of the highlights of the season was also Irish linked, but I was hoping that number 2 was going to be you and I having breakfast in that Irish pub, but clearly that was number 3 on your list. But
I forgot that you said personal and professional, and because the trip to Dublin this year was special. I got to spend time with yourself, George, people that when you cover the game from afar and remotely like we do, getting to spend that time with people in person it's actually extremely special and definitely a professional and personal highlight. And being for me, I ended up stopping in the same hotel as the Georgia Tech team. So getting back to my hotel to start writing at 10:30 at night or whatever it was, and sticking the Hawaii game on at 4 a.m. Getting back as the team and the players after that game, after that performance, that was truly special to be in and around that environment, and an experience you don't get to have too often. So yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think the scenes in Dublin were was quite something special and a great way to kick off. We'd see game day in Ireland and see all those people at game day. Because speaking to the people at game day, I don't think they were entirely certain who was going to turn up for it, right? And to see just that volume of people there for the show was quite something. Seth, where are your highlights falling from the season?
I'll give you all a personal one, a personal / professional one, and then I'll try to give you just a global one as a college football fan. So, on a personal note, my brother and I got to go to Athens for the Georgia-Tennessee game this year. Game day was in town. SEC Nation was in town. Part of our story is we came to be Georgia fans because we both went to schools that we always tell people didn't have real football. And so we went to Athens for the first time together back in 2003 for the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Jason Campbell was quarterbacking for Auburn, David Green for Georgia. Odell Thurman was on defense, and Georgia won that day, and Odell Thurman returned an interception, 99 yards for a touchdown right into the student section, and we've been hook, line, and sinker ever since. So every time we get to go to Athens together, which unfortunately, as we get older, as it is for all of us, seems to get fewer and far between, man, I just cherish it. And that day was really special because the weather was gorgeous. A good friend of mine who I've come to know through our show, Ray Fulcher, got to perform a song that he wrote called Two Cigars on Marty and McGee. We were there for it, got to spend some time with Ray after that. That was really awesome. One of our mutual friends, Laura Rutledge, was there with SEC Nation. We've had Laura on the show a bunch of times. She is, we have said as much as anybody will listen, the nicest person in not just all of college football, but probably all of college sports. She's just the best. And that was the first time we got to meet her in person, was there. So she was kind enough to chat with us for a little bit. So, and then obviously the way the game went, it was just a great night. So that day was super, super special. Probably my favorite day of the year. And then on a personal professional, my co-host and I are like, y'all, we don't record together. We're not in the same spot. He's my best friend from growing up. He lives in Virginia. I live in South Carolina. And we decided we were going to try and get credentialed for a couple games, rivalry games, Thanksgiving weekend in the Big Ten. And, it's one of those things where everything just worked out. All the families were okay with us going. We got credentialed in both places we wanted to get credentialed. All the flight arrangements worked out great, and we ended up getting to spend the Friday after Thanksgiving and Saturday after Thanksgiving in Madison for Paul Bunyan's Axe with Wisconsin and Minnesota, and then in Bloomington for Old Oak and Bucket, Indiana, Purdue. And man, just two of the elite college towns in America. And so it was just a magnificent experience. We had such a good time getting to see each other. It was the first time we'd seen each other in person since the Oregon-Georgia opener in 2022. So it had been almost 2 calendar years. So, man, I really enjoyed that. That was a lifetime weekend. I told my wife that when we got back. I was like, that was just out of this world. It was so awesome. So those were 2 really special kind of sequences. And then just on a global, from a fan perspective, man, was all the unexpected things I think that happened this year, whether it's Kirk Cignetti in Indiana or Kenny Dillingham in Arizona State, or you look at Jeff Monken and that Army team making the run that they made. Even I think, Ali, you talked about Ashton Jeanty, and you look at that Heisman race with Travis Hunter doing the singular things that he did all year, and the fact that we got to watch those performances. And in an NIL and transfer portal world, a guy like Ashton Jeanty saying, you know what, I'm staying at the place that wanted me when nobody else did. I thought was a really, really awesome college football moment too. So, yeah, man, 2024 is one of my most favorite college football seasons ever for all those reasons.
Kind of feels like we need a whole episode, or maybe an hour long episode, talking about our highlights of this season to try and bring it back to Georgia Bulldogs, because that's what we're going to talk about next, Seth. When after the SEC championship game, after they had won it, we were kind of waiting to get into the press room for the press conference. And then there was whispers from those who are more familiar with the Georgia media side of things that there would be another set of players, in fact, a larger number of players that would be available for interviews. So most people were kind of hanging about for that. To be led into the smallest room in the world, let alone inside that stadium, and all the players were kind of perched up high on these seats that I don't know where they came from, so everyone was talking up to them. And I cannot. I've got the best picture. I cannot forget Etienne's smile on his face when
Yeah.
people were talking about it. The smile did not disappear from his face. I mean, these guys were in there for half an hour at least talking to everybody, and the smile on his face will live with me for a long time. They were a happy bunch of lads, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I've developed my own segue into the final section, which is we wanted to ask Seth about the report card for Georgia, because I think it's fair to say, Seth, if you after the first quarter of that season, you might not have been so enthused about how far Georgia were going to get in that season. A lot of people had some somewhat negative views on Georgia's performance for the outcome of the season, but it turned into a pretty successful year for the Bulldogs. But that's me preempting what you're going to tell us, and I hope you're not going to give them an F.
No, no, I am probably outside of the mainstream of probably most Georgia followers, in that I am always very cognizant of how good it is right now, right? And I have a memory like an elephant, so I remember very vividly when it wasn't this good. And so I am so appreciative of this run, first of all. If you look at just the success over the last 4 seasons, it's unbelievable. And if you are a person that follows the Georgia Bulldogs and you're griping and complaining about something, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you talk about, we always say on the show that the good old days of Georgia football are right damn now. And that's how I feel about it. I mean, this is the time. And Kirby's outstanding, and the things you've gotten to see, if you love the Dogs the last 4 years, are things we couldn't have imagined 5 years ago. And so I'm just grateful for all that. And I think if you look at it globally with the way the season went, and if you follow them the way we follow them, I feel pretty good about how their season went. I would put them probably B plus, A minus. I mean, look, if you win an SEC title, that has got to still mean something. And it certainly means something to us. I mean, I was thrilled for that team. And if you've been to that game, it is its own animal. I mean, it is a spectacle. And it really is one of the better environments in college football. So for them to walk out of there with the confetti falling, I thought was outstanding, especially after the rigors of the season. And I know the schedule got talked about a lot, but I am more talking about, they had to deal with a lot of depth problems. All right. They lost their X and their Z to legal problems. So you got 2 guys on offense that aren't starting. They had 2 of their pretended, main contributors at running back that essentially didn't play all season. Travis Etienne was hurt most of the Trevor Etienne was hurt most of the season, so he wasn't as available as we would have wanted him to be. You get to see sensational freshman Nate Frazier kind of come into his own over the course of the season. And look, boys, let's have an honest conversation. Carson underperformed. I think if you had told folks that he was going to have the year that he had back in August and the Dogs are still going to win the SEC title, I think people would have been happy about it, to be honest. He just was very uneven. And I want to be very clear. I don't think that was all his fault, okay? Georgia led FBS in drops. And you just can't quantify how much that changes things for a quarterback's confidence and all these different things. So I thought he really steeled himself the last half of the season and really led them to be put in position where they could actually be in Atlanta. My running theme for this, and we actually talked to Laura about it when she was on the show, because I was interested if she had a feel on it because she was on the sidelines for a few of their games, is it felt like to me, and I'm interested to know what y'all think, that they had a little bit of a leadership problem. I did not think they had a group of alphas like they have had for so long. George, you mentioned Nolan Smith earlier, probably one of the greatest leaders the last 10 years for Georgia football. And, I think the special thing about those groups was he wasn't the only one, right? There was just a big group of them. So you had all these guys that are saying, hey, look, this is Georgia and this is the standard. And so this is where we perform every day to the standard. And I just don't think that was there this year. And I think it showed a lot. I thought Kirby tried to fill that vacuum the best he could. But as we all know, the best teams are the ones that are player-led. And I just thought they had a void in that area. And that's going to happen. For me, it reminded me a lot of the 2019 year. Jake Fromm's last year in Athens. They didn't have a ton of talent on the outside at wide receiver that year, really struggled offensively. They got into the SEC title game, but got dump trucked by that Joe Burrow LSU team, which dump trucked everybody. But that's kind of what it felt like. It was a grind all year. My co-host texted me after they lost to Notre Dame, and he goes, I want to be mad, but I'm just exhausted. And I thought that was a pretty apt description of most of the year. So yeah, I'm probably not going to be as hard as most folks. I'm going to go B plus A minus because SEC title got to mean something.
It was a very long year, Ollie, wasn't it? Would you concur with Seth's report card?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, you hit the nail on the head, because winning a conference championship has to mean something. And we talked earlier about what that means in terms of the college football playoff. I don't want to hear really those two conversations had in the same context, because you're going to have a team win the Conference USA that isn't going to be in the college football playoff. You're going to have a team win the Sun Belt who isn't going to be in the college football playoff. That doesn't mean that winning that championship means any less to those teams that fight for it, for those players that suit up every week to earn it, for those who that might be this crowning glory of their entire college football and football career. And it's a theme that we've touched on many times in this show, is college football isn't just the pipeline to the NFL. There's so many people involved that will never touch the NFL, and that what they do in these 4, 5, 6, 9 years, Cam McCormick, this will define them, their sporting achievements, accomplishments, prowess.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a conference championship and being a part of a conference championship winning team, it means a lot, and it goes a long way. And yeah, for a program like Georgia, that isn't the be all and end all. There's that standard now, and you're right, it's the standard that it is now. You kind of forget everything that's come, the 40-year drought. This is the standard now for Georgia Bulldogs football, is a national championship.
Yep.
So in the context of that, obviously it's not a great season. The inability to compete against Notre Dame was not ideal, and recency bias is a real thing, and that's the last kind of remembrance of Georgia's 2020 football season was the Notre Dame game. But yeah, as far as the leadership goes, I think there is a problem at Georgia. You're closer to it than we are, but from a distance, there's a lot of external things away from the football field that speaks to a lack of leadership that is obviously evident in the game. And I think, look at a guy like Cedric Van Pran from the seasons before. That's missing. Your guy at the pivot, your guy at the center of your offense. And yeah, it should be a quarterback. And that's a conversation about Carson Beck that we'll probably have this year as he plays for Miami. But I think a guy like Cedric Van Pran on that offensive front, Jordan Davis, in years gone by, always seemed like a guy who could bring a team together and rally a team. And I think there's an issue there. that isn't just strictly confined to the players in the locker room either. But yeah, anytime you win a conference championship, you've got to kind of have a little bit of a celebration. I feel, and that's my biggest takeaway from Georgia 2024. And who knows what 2025 will look like, because again, it's another year where the entire heart of the offensive line is off to the NFL.
That's right.
New quarterback. They're bringing a wide receiver like Zachariah Branch, which is a great ad on paper. We've got to see him handle the load as a go-to guy, a wide receiver one in the SEC, and that'll be interesting to see. And some of those defensive pieces that they lose this season as well. It's going to be an interesting season, I think.
Let me ask y'all this about how they look going into 25, because I've seen a bunch of these early projections, and they tend to fall somewhere in the 4 to 6 range. And I'm just being honest with y'all. That seems entirely too high to me. I think this is one of the more transitional years they've experienced in a long, long time. There is a lot of uncertainty at quarterback. I know everybody wants to say it's Gunner's job. I'm not convinced of that. I think Ryan Puglisi will have his name in that conversation. I think, to your point, Ollie, they're pretty much replacing their entire offensive line. They had real problems at both tackles last year. That's troubling. Nate Frazier comes back, which is great. I think they've got a lot of depth at tight end. But again, to your point, Ollie, what are the answers at wide receiver? So I think there are many, many uncertainties on offense. And then that doesn't even address what's being lost on defense and how thin they are at outside linebacker and at the pass rush position. And so I don't know. There is a lot of uncertainty for me from a fan's perspective and a follower of the program. And I am very, very curious to see how they navigate another gauntlet of a schedule. I mean, it's essentially 2024 all over again. I mean, they're getting folks between the hedges, but the quality of competition doesn't change. And so it's going to be an interesting year, I think, in Athens. We will see. We will see how much metal they have, I think.
Well, this is probably a conversation for another time when we have you back on, Seth. But this is where the transitory way that college football is going to impact schools like Georgia, right? Because traditionally, very good, as Kirby would say, elite recruiters, right? They stack the roster. But as you know, we've gone full circle. We'll go back to the opening gambit, which is, those rosters are not stacked any longer. You don't have the conveyor belt that Alabama had, where, you know, Nick Saban could play all his third years because he knew that his second and the freshmen are all sitting there waiting on their turn. That doesn't happen in football any longer. And there's a lot to do why Nick Saban's now, you know, working for ESPN. So that is going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because then your dominant schools who are recruiting have to fill plug that gap through the transfer portal. And then that's when money comes into play. But that's for another time, because as always, we've run out of time. That's all from us on this episode. It's been awesome to catch up with Seth again and talk about the Georgia Bulldogs. Seth, thank you. So for those who didn't listen to the episode first time around, tell our new listeners, where they can find you, and when the podcast runs through the summer, and what's going to fill your time between now and August.
Yeah. So first off, boys, thank y'all so much for having me. Always an honor to be on with y'all. I love what y'all do and what y'all bring to the culture and landscape of college football. So thank you for having me. You can find us all over social. We're on every platform. Try to stay active on as many of them as I can, especially in the season. We're probably most active, I guess you could say, on Instagram, but try to post across all platforms. And, you know, generally they're Saturday in Athens or Saturday_Athens across all those platforms. And then on YouTube, we started releasing all of our stuff via video now. Just trying to tap into that because we had all this great video content and weren't doing anything with it. So find us on YouTube, shoot us an email, direct messages, whatever it may be. We always love hearing from folks and kind of talking about the things that people want to hear about. We generally don't post as much in the off season, but we are trying to I started a little bit doing a campus icon series where we're trying to have on owners of these iconic establishments in college towns across America. So we had Nick's English Hut from Bloomington, Indiana, and featured them. And then we had Eskimo Joe's in Stillwater and featured Stan Clark, the owner and founder there. And so we're trying to coordinate with the different owners across, we're trying to do the Wheel at the University of Kansas, Mario's Fish Bowl in Morgantown, He's Not Here in Chapel Hill. So we're trying to kind of illuminate all these bastions of college sports towns across the landscape of America. So tune in for that. Hopefully we'll have some more of that content here soon.
Sounds awesome. And we didn't even have time to talk about our potential catch up in late September when
that's right.
Alabama and Georgia meet up. That's all from us. Thank you for listening. You are all awesome. Thanks to Seth and Ollie for their brilliant input. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.